All right, we're on page 11 of your book. We're going to talk about a scale, and specifically the major scale. So first off, this applies to every scale. A scale is simply a pattern of notes that ascends or descends by step by step to the same note an octave higher. One scale means from a D to a D, or an A to an A, or a G flat to a G flat. Doesn't matter what the intervals are. What does matter is that it's going one octave exactly. Second thing, each type of scale, major, minor, or anything else, has a pattern of whole steps and half steps which is always the same. So for example, a major scale will have the exact same pattern of whole and half steps. A minor scale, depending on the type, will always have the same pattern of whole and half steps. So today we're going to talk about the major scale. All right, so in this second box here, the major scale has a pattern of whole steps and half steps like this. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. It's written out there, or WWH, WWWH. To me, it sounds like a phone number, right? A grouping of 3, then a grouping of 2. Whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. That's how it sounds to me. So feel free to use that as a little trick. So now, with the major scale, the pattern is the same no matter what note the scale starts and ends on. We just said that a major scale always goes from C to C, or G to G, or A flat to A flat, or F sharp to F sharp, or E to E. No matter what your starting note is, you're always going to end one octave away. I want you to notice one other thing here with these whole and half steps in this lesson box. Notice that your whole and half steps are in between the notes. They don't go underneath the notes, they go between. These whole and half steps, think about what they are. They are distances. It's a distance you travel. So between the first note and the second note of a major scale, it'll always be a whole step. Between the second and third notes, it'll always be a whole step. Between the third and fourth notes, half step, etc., etc., etc. Okay, so with that in mind, there's another way you can remember what a major scale looks like. You can certainly remember this whole and half step business, WWH, WWWH, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. 357, blah, 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 whatever your phone number is, right? Or the second way to remember what the pattern is, the half steps come between the third and fourth notes and the seventh and eighth notes of the scale, or the seventh and eighth degrees of the scale. Okay, scale degrees 3 and 4, where are they? Right here. There's a half step between B and C, right? And then up at the top, notes 7 and 8, there's a half step between F sharp and G. This note is, of course, F sharp because our key signature says so. In this case, going from C to C, we have no key signature because a C major scale doesn't need any sharps or flat notes. You have a whole step. Here's your half step between notes 3 and 4, E to F, whole, 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 and then a half step between B and C, or notes 7 and 8 of the scale. All right, so again, 2 ways to remember how to write a major scale. Remember the rhyme, the pattern, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. Those are the distances between the notes. Or just remember that you have whole steps everywhere except between notes 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. All right? So with that in mind, you should easily be able to finish this page. It's simply writing out the pattern of whole and half steps in the major scale, and then of course marking the half steps in these major scales. You can safely assume they're not playing tricks on you. They are all correctly written major scales in their proper keys. All right, so mark the half steps in these major scales with a slur. Just put a slur between the 2 notes that are a half step away. Okay, and you can, if you can review back in the upper box, which notes in the major scale have the half steps. So very quickly finish up the bottom of this page. Pause the video right now, finish it up, and we'll carry on right away into page 12. Right, so page 12 is essentially giving yourself practice in writing major scales. I'm not going to do this whole worksheet with you. I'll do maybe a few little examples here and there, and then you're off to the races, okay? Now, there are a few things to remember as you are writing major scales. If you very quickly flip back to page 11, you'll see that interesting trivia on the bottom, the little square. It says it's impossible to have a mix of sharps and flats in a major scale. If a scale has both sharps and flats occurring in it, it's not a major scale. So in other words, if you find out that you need a sharp or a flat somewhere, you're only going to need sharps or flats. You can't mix them up. You can't mix them together. If you do, something will have gone wrong somewhere. Okay, so that's first. Always only use sharps or flats. Now there are a few more other tips and tricks here. It says always space the notes evenly over the entire bar that's given. So make sure you do that. You have a lot of space on each measure. Use the space. Okay. And another thing to remember when you're writing major scales is you have to use each letter name. Okay, you can't have, for example, on this first example, where they're asking you to write a major scale built off the note G. Well, if you have a G here, the next note cannot be another G, like a G sharp or any kind of G. It's got to be the next note. After the letter G comes the letter A on the space, and then the letter B on the line, and the letter C on the space. You have to use each letter name once. You have to always go up to the next letter name. Okay, don't just think that, oh, I used a G flat and I have to go up a half step, so I'll just use G or something crazy like that. You have to keep going. You have to advance a letter name with every single note. Okay, so let's begin with a few examples. We'll start with just the very first one. So it says draw notes between the given notes to make major scales. The first thing you can do when you have to write these major scales is put the notes on the staff. You know you have to use every letter name once, so put it on the staff. Now, always make sure you space your notes out as best you can. Okay, so give them a somewhat decent amount of room on either side. There's an F on the line and the G. Okay, so as you can see, my notes are relatively spaced out evenly, and I've used every letter name once. Okay. Now, I'm not quite done yet because I haven't ensured that I have that pattern of whole and half steps, or that I only have my half steps between notes 3 and 4 and 7 and 8. However you want to think of it is fine. Remember the pattern of whole and half steps, or just remember that half steps are 3 and 4, 7 and 8. For my part, I like thinking of the entire pattern, whole, half, whole, half. So I'm just going to give myself a little cheat sheet here. Whole, half, whole, half. Now again, notice I put these little markers between the notes, not underneath the notes. They go between because I want to make sure that the distance here is a whole step, the distance here is a whole step, half step, etc. So I know that this pattern is what I want, and so I just have to make sure that that is in fact what I have. So here's where again your piano keyboard will come in very handy. So as you can see, I've brought in a keyboard here, and I'm just going to move it a little bit below so I can make use of it. All right. Remember, your keyboard is your cheat sheet for so much theory stuff. Okay, it's absolutely invaluable. It can tell you so much about what you need to know. Just very, very quickly, I'm going to label my piano keyboard here. So I've got my C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, B down here, A, G. Okay, so my black keys, of course, show me where the half steps are between the notes, and I can begin. So I know that I need a whole step here between notes G and A. Is that in fact a whole step? We'll have a look at the keyboard. G to A is a whole step because you have the black key in the middle. How about A to B? So that interval is good. So my A will stay natural. Now A to B, is that a whole step? Well, have a look at your keyboard. A to B is a whole step because there's a black key in the middle. So the note B can stay as is. From B to C, I should have a half step here. From B to C, is that a half step? Yes, it is, because there's nothing in between. These notes are right beside each other. C to D needs to be a whole step, and yes, it is. So D can stay the normal. D to E needs to be a whole step, and it certainly is, because there's a black key in between. E to F needs to be a whole step. Have a look. E to F. Oh, hang on a second. E to F is only a half step. But E to F is supposed to be a whole step according to my pattern. So what do I have to do? Well, what is a whole step above E? If I look at my keyboard, here's my note E. A whole step above E is this black key up here. What do I call it? Well, since I have the note F on the F line up here, and I have to label this note, I'm going to call it F sharp. So I'm going to take my pen and put a sharp sign on that F note. Now I have the notes E to F sharp. E to F sharp is a whole step, as it should be. And now since I have F sharp, I'm going from F sharp to G. So F sharp to G is a half step, as it should be. I've now noticed that in order to make a scale, a major scale from G up to G, I needed to use one sharp, F sharp, in order to make that pattern of whole and half steps work. So notice, guys, I'm really just using my piano keyboard to help me find those notes and find those patterns. Okay, what I'm going to do is allow you to finish up this worksheet on your own. Make sure you read the instructions carefully and double check your work. We're going to take this one up in class because this is a very important lesson to make sure you can write properly major scales and using the proper spacing, using every note once, using only sharps or flats depending on the situation, and being very accurate with this, because doing this, it really is the key to the rest of this unit. All right, so finish up this worksheet and we'll see you in the next lesson.